I ask it, what do you hope is told about you and your story if your grandkids or your great grandkids one day are doing that?
Well, I know that they'll be telling this family story because I have every intention of whispering it in their ear the very first time they are in their grandmother's arms,
Mm,
because I am sure that that's why I know it.
mm,
Um, the other thing that I hope is that of all the things that I have done, and as I've had to prepare for these interviews and write bios and whatnot, and actually look back on these many seasons, of all the things, I hope it is said that I am a good mother,
mm,
that I loved my husband and took care of my children. And if I leave them nothing else, I've left them a legacy of how to love each other. Um, because really, at the end of the day, that is the stories that are going to be told.
mm.
I've got wonderful stories about cousin Betty Jean that I love to tell. Stories about my mother and how they both were fierce in telling this family story and guarding these archives. And so much so that as I begin to share them with the public, because I recognize that this is necessary for African and for American history, um, I do so with a lot of trepidation.
Mm,
These things have not been seen outside of our family.
mm.
And so it's not easy. But as we are cataloging, transcribing, and digitizing, we are hoping to present quite an extensive exhibit within our second season of The Legacy of Charity's Children.
Mm, mm. It's beautiful. It really is beautiful. I want to ask, Patricia, before maybe the last 30 questions I'll ask. Part of the reason I do this show and I love having these conversations is I think in many ways to the philosophical questioning is I'm trying to understand life, but I'm trying to understand what it means to live a good life. So to hear you say, that legacy of that I love my husband, I love my kids, I was a good mom. That's what I want for them. Um, that's exactly the types of things I love to hear and learn from. And I've done almost 200 of these conversations now at this point. I've heard all different types of values. I'm just curious, and there's no judgment in anybody in this, but I'm curious as you think about, I've heard people that it's about, being successful. There's some people that want happiness in life. There's all different things that people value. How do you think about that? How do you make sense of that? This world we live in where there's 8 billion people and there's so many different things people value and focus on. Obviously, for you, it's this point, it's family legacy, it's history and all that. For people that see it differently, that they focus, they spend their time, they dedicate as much time as you are to this, to something different. How do you think about that? Is everybody have their own path? Is it, if we're being totally honest, is it that people should focus on this more? And maybe if more people did, we'd be better off as a society. How do you think about that?
I think everybody's got their thing. Um, I think that within your thing, it is important to know where you're going.
Mm,
And quite often, there's a roadmap behind you
mm,
of within your family history of what to do or maybe even what not to do. And beginning to understand where you're coming from, just like our beautiful cousin who did never knew why she had this flair
mm,
for horses, why she was an equestrian. She never knew why. But it is a part of who you are. I've got a pastor that asked me one time why I was doing this and said, my family isn't about anything. My family's not from anything. And so I don't focus on that. I just, look forward to, building a legacy for the future. And I told him, I agree with that. I understand that, not agree with it,
Mm,
but I
mm,
understand that. And I explained to him, I said, but Pastor, look at this beautiful new church you built. Don't you wonder where and who in your history prayed and willed this into existence?
mm.
Don't you wonder why you were inspired to take this path rather than the other?
Mm.
Um, and I'm curious, which is part of the reason why I do this. I'm curious and wanted to know if these stories that had been told, oral histories as well as written histories, was it possible to verify this stuff? And to my absolute delight, it is. And we have. And
Mm,
take a listen.
mm. Makes me think the story of the past. There's a humility in that too, of accepting, acknowledging, as you said, what led you to that point, whose blood, sweat, tears, all of that got you to
Oh,
where you are. I think if
yeah.
you neglect that, if you ignore that, it's easier to become self-centered, to think it's more about you, to think in that, well, I'm not saying your pastor obviously felt that way, but I think part of the benefit we talked before about the connection it gives you and the comfort, I do also think it gives you a humility to it's much like religion, to believe you're part of something bigger, and that it wasn't just you that did this. There was so many people behind you that allowed for that, the good and the bad that led to it. I think that does bring some humility to people in that way.
Humility, as well as motivation,
Motivation.
as well as motivation. And maybe that goes back to that anger thing, is that, I allow it to be a motivator.
Mm,
Yeah, tell me I can't.
mm,
Yeah, I'm not going to get mad at you,
mm.
but I'll show you.
And now you know why. You know where that comes from because you got a long line of women who said the same thing.
Yeah,
Like, okay,
yeah.
let's see.